I want to talk about conversion therapy.
Yes.
Okay. Conversion therapy is in the news a lot at the moment. People are talking about banning it. It feels like it should be banned on the surface. What is conversion therapy?
Well, that depends who you ask. Traditionally, conversion therapy, conversion practices was aimed at trying to, forcibly change someone's sexuality. We had some abhorrent practices in the past, electroshock therapy, corrective rape, things like that, which thankfully have been illegal for a long time now. The modern definition of conversion therapy appears to be forms of talking therapy or religious interventions. And crucially, what's been added into the mix is not sexuality, but gender identity. So this idea that a therapist who seeks to challenge or explore, let's say, a child who says that they're trapped in the wrong body, there's a suggestion that that could be conversion therapy because you're not affirming somebody to be their true self, which is transgender.
So when people hear the word conversion therapy, I think a lot of people are imagining it is just that it's that gay conversion thing, which I think most of our society has now decided is a consensus that it is abhorrent and can ruin people's lives. There's loads of examples of people whose lives are ruined from that. And then they'll hear that someone like you doesn't want conversion therapy to be banned, and there might be this assumption, do you think, that you might be a homophobe or you want to change gay people?
Yes, and that's very much the intention of those kind of spouting this position, because I've been brandished a conversion therapist. And if you look back at what I've said, all I've ever said is that we should protect explorative therapy. We shouldn't have therapists who just mindlessly nod along when a client says, I'm trapped in the wrong body, I want to take hormones and have my breasts cut off. A therapist's role is to explore causation, explore options, sometimes even challenge a client's thinking. When we're dealing with mental health conditions, it's a very complex area. So all I've ever said is that we should be keeping explorative therapy, but people say that that's akin to conversion therapy. So this is the issue. And there's a lot of therapists out there who are now terrified of working with quote unquote transgender clients because they're worried that they're going to be branded conversion therapists and potentially, if this legislation goes through, potentially criminalized for it.
Is the legislation likely to go through?
It's very much on a knife edge at the moment. There's been a U-turns kind of back and forth. I mean, it's been pledged for many years. And then in the King's speech a couple of years ago, they said they would only ban it for sexuality, not for gender identity, which myself and colleagues felt was the right way to go. But now it seems like it could be back in again. The Labour Party have said that they want to introduce a kind of all singing, all dancing, no loopholes ban, which terrifies a lot of us because there's serious unintended consequences of this legislation. So it's anyone's guess at the moment.
Just to make it absolutely clear, I won't labour the point, but so somebody comes to you, a child, and they think they might be gay or lesbian or men or whatever. What would you do in those circumstances?
The same thing as I would do for any other client, which is to have an open dialogue and to explore those feelings, to explore what's gone on in their past life, etc., that's led to them to feel this way, not try and impose my own beliefs or position on it. At the end of the day, it's my responsibility to kind of help look after the well-being of that person in front of me. But I wouldn't be adopting an affirmative approach, which is if someone comes to me and says, I'm trapped in the wrong body, I nod along and say, yes, you are. And have you considered double mastectomy?
It seems to me these are two totally different issues, the issue of transsexuality or transgenderism and the issue of homosexuality. And I've heard a lot of people saying that as well. I mean, Andrew Doyle, a lot of gay people in that community say that as well. They don't really understand. There's the LGB Alliance as well. And some people say they're not just different, but they can't, they're mutually exclusive. They can't possibly, is that what mutually exclusive means? They can't exist at this. I always forget which one that means. Yeah, they're mutually exclusive, right? That they can't possibly exist at the same time because some people suggest that when a boy is gay, and I know this happens in like India, in Pakistan, I think, it's more appropriate over there to be transsexual than it is to be gay. So a lot of people become trans so that they can live what looks like a straight life. So yeah, what do you think of that?
Well, the line that LGB Alliance uses, transing the gay away. And that might sound extreme to some people, but that is in essence what is happening. In fact, myself and others would argue that is the conversion therapy that's taking place because we know most children with gender dysphoria, if left alone, will simply grow up and become happy, healthy, gay adults.
Is that right? Is that statistically the case?
Yeah. And so what we're effectively doing is eradicating gay children and turning them into, well, straight transgender people instead. The LGBT acronym, it's kind of it's a forced teaming in many ways. I mean, we saw this with Stonewall. For many years, Stonewall were there to represent LGB rights. They made a point of saying they weren't going to get involved with transgenderism or gender ideology. And then overnight, a number of years ago, they added on the T. And, that's had serious ramifications for the entirety of society, because now you can't separate these components out. You'd often see protesters with signs saying there is no LGB without the T. And that's extremely offensive for gay, lesbian and bisexual people. You basically said you're with us whether or not you like it.
The more that I think about this, actually, it just seems insane to me. I actually can't fathom it. And if, as you're saying, the statistics show that people are later in life just turning, I was gay, and and this idea as well, I find very old-fashioned. That if you are if you have stereotypically feminine traits, probably don't look like it on YouTube. I've got a lot of feminine traits. I'm very sensitive. I've got small hands, right? I know that's, that is a feminine trait, I think, a physical one. And I feel sort of quite feminine sometimes in the traditional sense of what we see as femininity. But I don't know. I don't know where I'm going with this, except to say that it does seem like these things don't fit together.
Well, this is the irony. I mean, you hear people identifying as non-binary. I mean, it's utter nonsense, because all of us are kind of non-binary. They have this idea that there's kind of these two poles with like this, ultra masculine man on one side and this hyper feminine woman on the other, and that doesn't exist. We're all a mixture of masculine and feminine traits, and so it's nonsense to even come out and identify as non-binary in that respect. I don't think it kind of plays to stereotypes, etc. But yes, I mean, going back to the sexuality point, I've got a lot of friends, a lot of colleagues who are gay or lesbian. And, they were gender non-conforming as children. I've got some lesbian friends who would be considered tomboys. They like to hang out with boys. They like to do the type of things that boys were doing. And, they tell me that if they were offered the opportunity at that point to transition and become a boy, they probably would have taken it. And they say to me time and time again, thank God I'm not a child in today's society, because I would have transitioned and I would have ended up regretting it for the rest of my life.
Wow. That's it's so difficult, and it becomes more difficult with people who have children. I don't have kids yet, but I know a lot of people who do. And a good friend of mine is really worried about this. And he says that in his opinion, the whole point of a parent is to be able to guide your child around the next corner, the things they can't see around the corner. That's your job. And sometimes that's going to be really difficult. And you're going to have to do things that might seem to the child to be cruel or bigoted or old-fashioned or whatever it might be. I can see why people put the LGBT with the T, because it's sort of minorities. These are people with minority differences and things like that. But it's also offensive in a way, because it's sort of saying, well, these are the people with the sort of fetishy things, the weird things. And it's saying, you're all the weird people put together, I think, when you put them together. Whereas if you treat them as two separate things entirely, LGB and here's T, it's not making them such an other. It's just like, okay, here's your thing, let's deal with each thing. And it also allows for, unfortunately, sneaky things to be brought in one bill, sort of hidden underneath, because this conversion therapy, I think most people are going to be like, we've got to ban that.
Yeah.
And they don't actually know what's going on.
Yes, well, exactly. And this kind of LGBTQ plus exclamation mark, squiggly line umbrella is widening all the time. And you're getting people now saying, for example, there's a term minor attracted person. This is, adults who have an attraction to children. People are arguing that should be brought in within that umbrella, that this is just another type of sexuality. So in terms of what you're saying, again, it's this forced teaming. You're basically being told you're with these group of people. Even if you've got nothing in common with them, even if you disagree on everything, you're still part of our gang, whether or not you like it. And what's ridiculous in all of this is that I would say that gender ideology is homophobic in and of itself, because it tells people that there is no such thing as same-sex attraction. They say it's about one's gender, one's self-identified gender. There's a woman recently who set up a kind of lesbian dating event, and she was branded transphobic and a bigot because she wasn't allowing men who identified as women to be there. it's actually erasing the entire concept of homosexuality.
Man, what would you do? Someone gets brought in to your therapy, and they probably wouldn't get. Well, maybe they would. Maybe their parents would want them to see. And also, what's your therapy called? Thoughtful therapists.
Yes.
People come and see thoughtful therapists. They take the child. They've got. What do you do? I know you explore, but what does that really mean? Is there ever a point where you go, okay, well, you should transition?
For me personally, and when it comes to children, no. I don't believe that children should be transitioning. And that includes social transitioning, changing pronouns, etc. And that includes medical transitioning, puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. I do not believe that children have the capacity to make these decisions about themselves when we're dealing with kind of experimental, irreversible medicalization. We don't allow children of a certain age to vote in an election or to buy a cigarette. So why should they be able to essentially consent to being left infertile for the rest of their lives? But the exploration piece is crucial because we know alongside gender dysphoria, there's often other comorbidities present. Things like internalized homophobia, things like autism. Significant proportion of children with gender dysphoria suffer from autism. Previous traumatic experiences, bullying, abuse, etc. These all need to be worked through because, in essence, what myself and colleagues would say is gender dysphoria, feeling trapped in the wrong body, hating your body, is actually a symptom of a wider disease that somebody has got in their body. It's not the thing in and of itself. And the hope is that if you can help someone to, come to terms with what they've been through, to gain closure on trauma, to start to accept their bodies and the way they are, that dysphoria will hopefully go away.
Do you know roughly what percentage of children who identify as trans are autistic, and why that correlation might be there?
I don't have the exact figures on me, but it is a significant percentage. And I think the reason for that is because of the way that people with autism, their minds often work. And again, they can kind of attach themselves to lines of thinking that are really quite rigid in nature. So again, we're looking at this idea of masculinity and femininity. You could see how a child with autism, let's say a young girl with autism, if they kind of look a bit like some of the boys, if they want to hang out with all the boys, if they like doing things that are considered to be boyish, then you can see how they could convince themselves, well, actually, maybe I am a boy, really deep down. It's not just that I'm a more masculine girl. And people are taking advantage of this as well. And I'm seeing a lot of quote unquote charities, who are essentially these activist groups, running sessions for autistic children, etc., pushing a narrative that they might have been born in the wrong body. I think it's so damaging. I come back to the point that gender dysphoria is a mental health condition. So we should treat it the way we treat any other mental health condition, and that's not through hormones and surgery.
I suppose the problem with the mental health condition thing is that it's subjective, isn't it? It depends what society you're in. I always hear that something being a disorder depends on whether it makes it difficult for you to fit in with society. So being gay was considered one back when you couldn't be gay in society, and it made life difficult for people who were gay because they had to hide it. And once that's now allowed, so that's where a lot of people will argue that the trans situation, calling it a mental health disorder, they would say, well, that's subjective.
I see what you're saying, but you need to think about it from this perspective, which is that it is a fact that we have people who are same-sex attracted in our society, and we've had that, since time immemorial. Counter that with the fact that sex is binary and immutable. Human beings cannot change their sex. It doesn't matter if you change what clothes you're wearing, or your pronouns, or you take some hormones, or you have your breasts removed. You cannot change the sex that you are. And so somebody believing that they were born in the wrong body, there is no basis on which to argue that. That is why it is and should always remain a mental health condition. We see other types of dysphoria and dysmorphia, body dysmorphia, where people have a real loathing or hatred for parts of their body. It's not uncommon for human beings to dislike parts of themselves. I'd say, actually, you'd be hard-pressed to find one of us who doesn't dislike a part of our body. Yeah.
Men look terrible. They don't look good. And I don't mean that just because I'm straight. I mean, objectively, it doesn't look, unless you are David Beckham or something. Even if he was naked, I bet it wouldn't look good.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really thought about that much before. But yeah, I agree with you in the sense that human beings are kind of funny looking creatures in many ways, aren't we? And men in particular at times. But, we kind of have to embrace that. We've been given the bodies that we've been given.
Yeah.
The answer isn't just to kind of chop off parts of our body. You have to get to a place where you're accepting of what you've been given. So you can see why it's quite, quite a nice idea, really, that, children have been told, well, if you don't like a part of yourself, just change it. I mean, this is a different topic altogether, but we see this, significant increase in the amount of kind of plastic surgery that's going on in society, and people having Botox and filler and all the rest of it. This is worrying, It's basically, we're kind of making ourselves into, life-size Barbie dolls where you can kind of mix and match bits of yourself. And I from a therapeutic perspective, I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah, it's mad. It's the opposite of what we were told, I think, growing up, which is that it's what's inside that counts. And I suppose a lot of people in favor of the trans ideology in this sense would say, oh, but it is inside. I feel like a woman on the inside. But this is where the logic, to me at least, is circular, and it doesn't really work, because there's this suggestion that your body doesn't matter. It's you are a woman, you are a man. Well, if it doesn't matter, why are you doing these things to your body, which are extreme if it doesn't matter? So obviously either it matters or it doesn't matter in defining your sex or gender. I don't understand why the operations are taking. And then the other circular logic, which is when people say it's often is men to women for whatever reason that might be. I feel like a woman, and I don't want to quote Matt Walsh because I don't align with him politically in most things, and I find him quite abrasive. But when he says, what is a woman? And it's such a simple question. And if you can't answer it without referring to using the word woman in it, I think anybody who's gender critical can define what a woman is quite simply. You can say XX chromosomes. You can say typically somebody with a womb, unless there has been an issue or something like that. They can't see, and it frustrates me because I want to almost be on that side, because I know I'll get more points. Do you know what I mean? I'll get virtue points. People will just be, and I wouldn't have to address this in these interviews when I'll lose loads of subscribers for it, and life would be really easy. But I can't make it make sense in my head. And I do think these things, at least with children, an adult can do whatever they want, but children, I think, need to, that's why I wanted to talk to you. I think they need to explore these things with therapy.
Well, you can't make it make sense because it doesn't make sense. We're living in this kind of postmodernism world where we're told, everything is subjective and everything's up for grabs, and that that might make people feel happier and make them sleep better at night, but it's simply not true. There are some objective truths in this world, and biological sex is one of them. It's interesting that you've noted the kind of the pull towards going along with this narrative, because you would get brownie points, because it is trendy, and I think a lot of people who don't truly believe it will still go along with it because it will win them favor or make their lives easier. I'm very happy that you're not doing that, but the people who are doing it are complicit in all of this, to be honest, and they're causing as much damage as the people who are kind of actively pushing it, because they're bystanders allowing harm to be caused to children.